Well, listening to that with me in the studio is the Shadow Chief Secretary, the Conservative MP, Richard Fuller. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, what's your response to Roger and the hundreds like him who have lost their seats? What has gone wrong there? You heard him say there about a loss of credibility, short term.
Yeah. I've known Roger for many, many years, and he was an outstanding leader of Kent Council. And as they say, the new reform leadership will have big shoes to fill to try and replicate Roger's and his fellow Conservative councillors' success. But as Roger was saying, and other Conservative councillors, I think, across the country, knew they were going to this election, yes, coming from a high point in 2021, but also in the shadow of people still not giving the Conservatives the benefit of the doubt when it comes to saying that we're ready to trust you again with national leadership. And that still hurts, I think, at a low level. And the answer is exactly what Roger said, which is to focus on trying to come up with serious policies to some of the very difficult problems the country faces.
Yeah, that is the issue, isn't it? Because we keep hearing this again and again from people in your party. It's about trust, rebuilding trust. But voters need something they can actually believe in. And where are these policies? Yeah. Where are these answers?
Look, that's exactly right. There's enormous pressure, of course, to come out with answers immediately. And also, I would say a lot of politics, and we're going through this, I think, a decade now, of all this disruption and emotion playing such an important role in how people respond to things, and people sensing that the politicians today don't have answers to problems. And so when some politicians listen to that, they think the answer is to scratch the itch, to say, yes, I hear that you've got a problem. Let me just tell you how bad it is. That isn't good governance. And what we found out in 2024, is if you don't have the policies to solve those problems, people turn away very quickly. Now, Sir Keir Starmer has said that his answer is, I think in a rather tin-eared fashion, to go further and faster. The Conservative Party has to think deeply about policies that are going to work, make sure we've got the people to put them in place, and then we'll regain the trust.
But how long are you going to think on this? Because you've now had a leader, for almost 6 months. That's plenty of time to reflect. And people want answers now. They were going to the ballot box this week. You've seen what has happened. You're Chief Secretary for the Treasury, for example. Now, we heard the Mayor of Doncaster, Labour mayor, talking about, for example, national insurance contributions, and also other policies like the winter fuel allowance, the way the government has acted on that. Are those the kind of things you reverse? People want to know what you stand for. Would you change that, for example?
So there are a number of things that we have said. So one of the fundamental points, I think, that Kemi Badenoch has said is that under her leadership, we are dropping the arbitrary targets on net zero. That's important because it's the start of understanding a new policy on energy that will help British businesses and will help deliver lower bills. We've heard it when it comes to issues like the jobs tax and the pressures on businesses, where the Conservative led opposition to that. We've heard
would you reverse that?
So we have to look at all of these things in the round. So there are large measures where there are a substantial amount of taxes where you have to wait and see what the state of the public finances are. But there are smaller issues, such as the move on the very devastating family farm tax, which I represent a rural constituency, and I know not only the financial impact it's going to have on families, but the emotional impact on those where the basically it was done for political reasons rather than financial reasons. We've been very clear that we will reverse that. So there are a series of policies where we come through and can say absolutely clearly and are saying where we will make changes happen.
But you can see that's not cutting through on the doorstep as yet. How long has your leader got to come up with these answers? Are we going to see her in position at this time next year at this rate?
Well, of course we are. I mean, I think it is interesting in local elections, and I think it was More in Common did a poll on this about when people went to vote in the local elections on Thursday, were they voting for a good local councillor or were they voting to send a message to the government? And largely, Conservative voters, obviously Labour voters, were going to vote for their councillor, but Reform voters, which made substantial gains, were trying to send a message to the government, and that's important that we recognise that. The elections, the primary message in this election was to Keir Starmer. He was saying things like cutting back on pensioners' winter fuel allowance, things like the decisions he's made on the jobs tax is the wrong direction.
Well, it wasn't just a message to the Prime Minister, was it? It was a message to what we call the two leading parties, dissatisfaction with MPs in general. Are we just adding to the problem here? Are you adding to the problem?
I look at it just slightly differently, which is, I think there's a message to the government, but that goes to the core issue, which is we have real problems in this country. People think the country is changing too fast. People think that public services aren't working. People are worried that their children aren't going to have a better future. People are somewhat worried about their security. They want answers to those. And they looked at the Conservative Party 29-24 and said, you were divided and you didn't actually deliver on things that we thought. They're now saying that of Labour. So it's about...
But they're saying that of you too, right?
But, they're saying that they want solutions to their problems. And I think one of the issues here for reform, just not trying to, but we're trying to work on those solutions. I think one of the issues for reform is they're going to find soon that slogans that just scratch the itch will have to be replaced by what really is reform's proposing to actually do to solve something.
Well, we'll have to wait and see what they do now. They actually have this power, but when we look at these results, can you rule out having to have some kind of a pact, maybe even unwillingly, with reform if you want to get Sir Keir Starmer out of the next election?
Well, I mean, there are no pacts. There won't be pacts. Nigel Farage has been very clear that he wants to destroy the Conservative Party, and there are differences between Nigel Farage and I. So, for example, Reform and I would probably agree on we wouldn't take a knee to the latest woke culture, but equally I wouldn't take the knee to Putin. I believe with Reform in a thriving economy, but I disagree with Reform that they think nationalisation is the answer to it. There are substantial areas of difference, and of course Reform itself is split. There are part of Reform which are former Conservative voters, but now you have this popular nationalism that's coming up, and that is something very different. And so I think Nigel Farage, I don't mean to tell him he knows exactly what he's doing, but I do think there's an issue here inside Reform, and we'll see that play out across the country now in these councils.
Well, it's going to be a fascinating year ahead to watch how all these things play out. Richard Fuller, Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, thank you.
Thank you.
And